Hi there, I'm Richard Hill, the host of eCom at One, and welcome to episode 207. In today's episode, we're diving into one of the biggest challenges in e-commerce marketing, attribution, with multiple touch points across paid ads, organic search, email, and social. Understanding where your revenue is actually coming from can feel like a guessing game. But getting attribution right is crucial. It helps you scale profitably, optimize ad spend, and double down on what's working. So, how do you move beyond last click models and truly track the impact of your marketing efforts? That's where James Hawkins comes in, Senior Partnership Manager at Triple Whale. We talk why has attribution become such a major challenge for e-commerce brands in recent years, and how privacy changes like iOS 14.5, GDPR, and cookie restrictions impacted marketers' ability to track and measure performance. How to avoid the biggest mistakes e-commerce brands make when it comes to attribution, and what role does AI and machine learning play in improving attribution models for e-commerce? And of course, so much more in this one. If you enjoy this episode, hit the subscribe or follow button wherever you are listening to this podcast. So you're always the first to know when a new episode is released. Now, let's head over to this fantastic episode. Well, James, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to eCom at One. I think before we get into all things attribution, Triple Whale, and the state of the nation, it'd be great for you to introduce yourself and how you got into the world of e-commerce.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so hi, I'm James Hawkins. I'm the partnership manager based here in the UK for Triple Whale. I was brought into the team last October purely and simply because what we found that Triple Whale was really getting a lot of ground here in the UK and that it was crying out to have presence and boots on the ground here within the territory. But my story of actually getting into attribution is a long checkered story, so I will give you the abridged version. But the background primarily is left university and found myself in sales. My first job was making 200 cold calls a day, and I consider that my apprenticeship for everything business moving forwards. I then did a brief stint selling school dinners, which was nice. And then realistically what I wanted something a lot more dynamic. And this was the time when obviously e-commerce had been around for a while, but we were starting to see the advent of things like Shopify, a lot more the flexibility, a lot more dynamism in the industry, a lot more tech companies sort of growing up. And I think that decentralization of tech, beforehand it was very much your Oracles of the world had a big tech stack. And then as that kind of then started to split apart, it gave an opportunity for a lot more tech companies to come to the fore, to start doing some really interesting and exciting things. And then, we kind of just saw an explosion, and I've ridden that wave since, really. Spent some time working in various different areas of e-com, but primarily on the on-site side. So I worked in loyalty for a little while for Loyalty Line, who you may have heard of.
Yeah.
And then I moved into attribution, and the stars aligned.
Wow.
And
what a journey, eh?
Yeah.
School dinners. 200 phone calls a day.
That's it.
And then now here we are, attribution. Eh?
That's it.
200 phone calls a day. I like that. I like that.
Like I say, that was my apprenticeship into the world of work. I think if you can do 200 cold calls a day, you can do anything.
Yeah, that'll put the fear of most people, to be fair, 200 calls a day, but the sort of the confidence to deal with whatever you're asked, maybe some random question on a podcast 10 years later, you'll be able to cope with it really well.
That's it. Throw them at me. I'm ready. Let's go.
Let's go. So attribution, why, when I think about e-commerce, there's obviously a lot of different channels, a lot of different ways that people can find stores now. But why has attribution become such a challenge for e-com stores, would you say, over the last few years?
I think attribution just in general has become so challenging, mainly due to the increase in privacy laws, right? And I think if I kind of consider e-commerce as like a before COVID and an after COVID period, because if we think it was 2020 that iOS 14 came out, it was at that sort of same time. During COVID, we saw this enormous rise of e-commerce. And I think there's still this mindset, because before COVID, attribution, it was very much the heyday. We're all running around high-fiving because, you could just throw money at Meta, you could throw money at Google, you could target so precisely that you knew that where you were putting that money was going to be driving you an ROI. Introduced then cookie restrictions, iOS 14, GDPR, all of these sorts of things. Attribution just then became an entirely different ballgame. And it was almost overnight. If we look at 14.5, the introduction of that, once that was introduced, only 25% of people allowed apps to track.
Overnight, isn't it?
Overnight.
Yeah.
And so you've got businesses who have had this long-standing attribution strategy that they've been working with for years and years as they've grown their business, just overnight completely upended. And so I think, to answer your question about why attribution is so important, I think where we stand now, we've had this kind of, someone coined it the other day, the COVID hangover, where, we kind of see a bit of a tapering off of that explosion. But I think there's a lot of folks who are still looking to try and replicate what was happening pre-iOS 14, and they're looking for a solution that's going to replicate that so that they can be operating in the same way, that kind of throw money into the hole and it will start generating ridiculous ROIs. But I think the reason attribution is now so important is that it's not just something you need to do. It needs to be an entire strategy. You need, as a brand, to have a firm strategy in all areas of your attribution funnel, not just hoping for the best, but what's bringing new eyeballs in at top of funnel, what's generating interest mid funnel, what's closing business and converting people bottom of funnel, how am I doing my branding, what's my awareness like, all of these sorts of different elements. And the reality is that a lot of the in-platform reporting just doesn't answer a lot of those questions.
So I think for the guys that are listening, I think obviously the game's changed, and I think some people are hanging in there and well, no, the sort of reporting's okay. Well, 2 + 2 + 2 is not 9, and you didn't do 300 grand, you actually did 250 grand. Yep. So there's something amiss, isn't there? What are some of the common themes you're seeing with brands that are still maybe hanging in there? The sort of what are some of the biggest mistakes you're still seeing with e-com brands when it comes to sort of attribution tracking?
I think the number one, and I think this is for a lot of folks would empathize with this, is the trust that people do put in platform. I'm not here to bash everyone, but somebody explained it to me the other day in a way that I thought was remarkable. It was like, at the end of the day, these ad platforms are marking their own homework. And I was like, that's a very good way of putting it, actually.
Like it. Yeah.
Because everything's operating on last click. Everybody's just grabbing that information. Like you said, 2 + 2 + 2 does not equal 9. And actually, when we look at it from a business perspective, if you were to take the revenue that each of your platforms was claiming they've made you, add that together, it's less 2 + 2 + 2 = 9. It's more, 2 + 2 + 2 = 300. It doesn't reconcile with the P&L. So I think that's the biggest, one of the biggest mistakes I'm seeing is that people, for whatever reasons, either aren't scrutinizing what's being reported to them and then comparing that revenue to their P&L, or if they are, they're just kind of allowing it. And I think that's probably my primary mistake I'm seeing. And then I think secondly, what I would say is, going back to my point around strategy, is that not all platforms are created equal, but also they all do slightly different things. And as I mentioned before, acquisition, attribution in general is a strategy, and it's a patchwork. And I quite often speak to agencies, for example, and they'll be like, oh, well, one of my clients saw a drop in ROAS in Meta, for example. So knee-jerk, they want to turn Meta off.
Yeah.
But actually, when we lay that out in Triplewell, for example, when we look at that customer journey, we see that actually 83% of those journeys, of which Meta was a touch point, had a Google touch point as well. And actually, they also had a TikTok touch point. And it just becomes this fabric. And I think it's less around putting all the onus on each channel individually and more about trying to understand that entire patchwork and how that works for your business.
I think you explained that very nicely. Yeah. That sort of patchwork, that holistic view, isn't it? Because on their own, it's quite an inaccurate position reporting. Oh, Facebook, Meta, last click. We're down, but actually, that platform touched that user here, and here. Okay, the conversion was in AdWords, for example. But does that mean we turn off Meta? Usually not.
I think, and I was chatting to somebody the other day, and they were saying that they had a long-standing Google campaign and hadn't really touched Meta in the past. They'd just done a bit of kind of awareness. But then they started working with an agency who did a lot of work around branding and also top-of-funnel activity through Meta. And they saw their ROAS from Google increase. And they were like, I don't understand how. And I was like, well, it's because it's that patchwork,
Yeah.
it's not that one is doing more than the other. It's just they all kind of combine. I think the average touch points that people have now is about 5 or so.
Yeah, at least.
Well, and especially if you're a considered purchase, you've got to go and show your mum, your wife, your uncle before you actually buy something.
So true, isn't it? We're having a few things done to the house at the moment, and it is. It's not like, oh, yep, buy. It's, let's go to the shop, have another look. Let's go and have another look online. Let's read all the reviews. Now I've got, obviously, Meta's hitting me with the remarketing, whatever. TikTok vids are coming through, reviews, YouTube videos, 2, 3 months, 4 months. New settee is one of the things on our list at the moment. And we've spent a lot of time like showing the kids, like, what do you think of that one? Oh, no, I don't like that one. Oh, this one. Oh, YouTube ad, Facebook ad. Different platforms coming through. We haven't bought the damn thing yet, but I'm sure we'll probably end up in store. But again, that's a tricky one to track as well, isn't it? So we're more than likely for that purchase, we'll end up in store. We'll go and buy it there and then in the store. But of course, we've spent a lot of time considering what size, color, etc. To get. Same with the table as well. We're looking at it's to track some of those things. I mean, So I like the patchwork analogy. That's a brilliant sort of, what are some of the things that brands can do to sort of maybe see beyond that last click attribution? Obviously, we'll talk about triple well, but what are some of the things that some of the brands can do to sort of help report on a more holistic view? You touched on obviously having the data from the back end of the platform, for example. But is there any other things you're seeing successful brands doing to really track the bigger picture?
So you mean their kind of wider exposure and the impact that's having on the business? I think, like I say, first things first is really doing a bit of housekeeping.
Yeah.
Doing housekeeping in terms of your tracking and those, as you mentioned, those sources that you're using to understand it. Yes, I work for one of those sources, but at the end of the day, if you're not doing server-side tracking at the moment, you're missing out on a lot of stuff. And what that first and foremost will allow you to do is nothing's a silver bullet these days, but it will at least allow you to start from a position where you can be confident in the information that you've got and confident that it's giving you a snapshot in terms of your performance across the different channels. I think from there is making sure that you are just constantly refining your performance strategy. Just because something worked 1 month doesn't mean it's going to work the next month.
Yeah.
Taking into account things like seasonality, if you're a company that works on drops, what's going on in the world, all of these sorts of things, even down to the weather in some cases.
Yeah.
That's going to affect the strategy that you put in place. And I think you need to be agile enough to do that. And you need to be in a position whereby you can adapt fluidly to put your best foot forward to get the majority of customers across the line. And then I think just lastly, just constantly scrutinizing the data that's coming across, making sure you're comfortable with it, making sure it's answering the questions that you have, and making sure it aligns with where you're trying to take the business.
Now, you might be looking for an SEO boost, a down-to-earth digital PR campaign to share your story, or maybe just some straightforward technical help to amp up your performance. Now that's where eCom Now comes in. A partner that's all about making things easier for your online store. Our services cover everything from creating professional content for your e-commerce categories to refining your product descriptions. Now, whether you're just starting out or have been in it for a while, we're here to deliver real impactful results that add to your bottom line without unnecessary commitments. You can order one-off or multiple projects with a quick turnaround. Simply choose what you need.
So the brands that are sort of circa 10 mil plus that maybe want more of a solution focused SaaS to work with, tell us a bit about Triple Well, how that can help.
So I think in a nutshell, Triple Well is just going to answer your question when it comes to server-side tracking, gathering information around what your audiences are doing and where they're discovering you. In its basis form, Triple Well exists to gather data into one place so that you can understand your business holistically. I think that's one of the things that we, again, quite often overlook, especially in like the Shopify ecosystem. Data's not hard to come by. It's just rather siloed. So it's very difficult as a business owner to be able to identify if I make a change to A, not what's going to happen to B, but what's going to happen to L, Z, whatever.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, Triple Whale puts all of that data into one place from the acquisition and the attribution perspective. It's that server-side tracking. It's gathering the best quality data that you can get hold of, so that you are able to be best placed to understand, as I mentioned before, all of those different acquisition strategies and action off the back of them. But then it's looking at some of the other functionality as well. Things like we last year released something called Sonar, which is essentially our CAPI that then pushes the event data that we gather through our pixel back into the ad platforms. So at the moment, that's live on Meta and Google, and also Klaviyo from a retention perspective. But you asked a question a moment ago about what's something that people could do to go beyond kind of that attribution piece to to grow their businesses and start to leverage more out of attribution. That is another thing that I think is highly important, is leveraging something like a CAPI solution, ideally Triple Whales, because at the moment we're seeing some unbelievable results, sort of 22% increase in revenue from abandonment flows in Klaviyo, just by passing that information back into Klaviyo, 17% increase in ROAS from meta campaigns, where Sonar is in play and passing that information back. Because it just, again, it allows you to be so much more targeted. You're not doing things like double acquisitions and all of these sorts of things.
Yeah, interesting. I think it'd be good for you to maybe step us through like a case study, what you think about some of the brands you've worked with, maybe some of the problems they've come to you with, which no doubt we've covered quite a lot of already, ultimately some very poor tracking in place, or, it is what it is. In certain instances, it is, you're relying on, the different platforms, but unfortunately, they have their own, their own sort of reasons why they are reporting how they are reporting. But obviously, a lot of brands come to you and come to Triple Whale, and I think it'd be good to step through from maybe the eyes of a listener that's sitting there doing 10, 15 million pound, a good £1 million plus a month. Know they've got some attribution challenges, and maybe working with an agency, and they've built them some bespoke, Looker Studio reports, and maybe pulled in some data into that from the back of Shopify to sort of match, the 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 channels pulled in. But then they've got the Shopify data. They know there's some disparity there, but no doubt that's something you see most days. Most days of the week, you get up to that sort of challenge. Maybe step us through a case study or two and what they were able to do then with better data to help them make better decisions with their advertising.
So I don't necessarily have a case study on a brand level basis off the top of my head. Forgive me for that. But I think, in general, the majority of conversation is just a bit of exhaustion, really. People just being relatively exhausted, because as you mentioned before, you do get these plateaus in growth. Again, not to harp on about it, but we saw that enormous explosion of the industry, 10 years worth of growth in 90 days in 2020. Ridiculous. And again, people searching for that, and we're seeing a drop in the industry. So people are at the moment looking to refine, and you mentioned a moment ago, just making those tiny percentage changes here and there. I don't want to say it, but marginal gains that all amount to a maximum. And I think when we speak to folks from a brand perspective, it's really, like I say, that level of, right, we've kind of come to the end of our tether. We are at our limitations in terms of what we can understand, what we can refine, what we can do. We spend all our time in, ads library trying to understand what our competitors are doing.
Yeah.
But the reality is so much time is being spent analyzing data that's going to help you move the needle 0.5%. So actually, it's a case of the best reactions we get when we kind of introduce folks to Triple Whale is that idea that you can start to have a more holistic understanding of your business. And through things like forecasting and MMM from a performance marketing perspective, modeling out what those future predictions of your business will look like, it allows you to almost iterate and then be able to put strategy in place that's going to meet that, depending on where you're looking for your business to go. So, for example, if you're at 5 million, you want to get to 10 million, you need to then first understand where you are as a business, what's working, what's not working, benchmark against your competitors, what sort of results are they seeing, and then like I say, start to iterate off the back of it, use some of the forecasting models, understand your MMM, what would be your optimized spend, where should you be putting your money, all of these sorts of things to best support your brand in that journey of growth.
Love it. So on that sort of vein, typically most of our listeners, they'll probably be investing in 5 or 6 paid channels. They're probably doing some UGC with influencers, no doubt doing email. They maybe got what else is in the mix? SEO, of course. Is there any sort of is there any culprits in there or different patterns you're seeing when people are doing a lot of the different channels? Because I think as smaller brands, quite often they usually are maybe just doing SEO and PPC, SEO and Google, maybe a little bit of Meta. But as you start to grow, it's quite common that 5-10 million plus, you're investing very heavily into TikTok, Meta, search ads, shopping ads, maybe some display, YouTube, email marketing, of course, and then email marketing is very usually flows and campaigns, and then on organic, you've got the the SEO content machine that you're no doubt investing in, and then the link building and the PR, and then all of a sudden we've gone from maybe 2 or 3 channels maybe 5 years ago to this maybe 10 areas of investment. Is there any sort of patterns you're seeing, maybe whether certain channels really overestimate, without saying any brand names maybe, because we don't know say any of our other guests that have been on the podcast, but are certain marketing channels a little bit how can I put it, a little bit naughty with their attribution, or any sort of patterns you're seeing with the firms that are doing a lot with a lot of channels?
So I think part one of that question, it's difficult to pull out one in particular channel. I think they're all quite naughty, to be honest. But I don't think that's necessarily vindictive. I don't think anyone's sat there going, we're rubbing their hands going, we're going to over-attribute here. I just think it's the nature of how their businesses are based and how they track. By their very nature, they're not recognizing the patchwork element of things because they only have access to the information that they have about their platform. So, I'm seeing just a lot of over-attribution. But then I think there's some interesting channels that people are starting to make more use out of, which are quite interesting to me. So, for example, AppLovin. I hope I get this right, but it's essentially positioning ads on mobile games. So we integrated with them, I think it was just shy of Black Friday last year, but actually for a lot of folks, it drove a lot of performance over that period. And it was something that, yes, there's always been ads served during mobile games, but I thought that's something I hadn't really thought of before, and actually an area where there are a lot of captive eyeballs. And to a certain extent, you can be quite targeted. Understanding game A resonates with men in your demographic. Makes sense to advertise there. So that's certainly one of the things I've seen. And then certainly there's been a lot of changes recently with the advent of AI. I hate the word AI. I feel like it's just used so much at the moment, and it feels like a bit of a marketing term in a lot of senses. But when used properly, it's so phenomenally helpful. I think you mentioned yourself that, when we get to a certain level, we're not just dealing with Meta and Google, we're dealing with 4, 5, 6, 7 different ad platforms. You've got to be constantly iterating on those platforms. You've got to be worrying about your SEO and making sure that you're discoverable organically. And in its very basis form, if you look at AI or LLMs in general, all it simply does is it allows you to ingest a huge amount of data that would take a human 5 days to run through and pull any discernible insight out of it, and at the click of a finger be able to get insight off the back of it. So where we're seeing a lot of successful brands operating at the moment is making use of that technology. Now, obviously, everybody's familiar with your chat GPTs and these sorts of things. It's a good place for broad market research. But actually, again, one of the things that we worked on and released last year was our internal AI. So everything's a whale pun, I'm afraid. So Sonar, we mentioned before, this one's Moby. And Moby's an LLM that literally does just that. I mentioned before that Triple Well essentially pulls all of your data in one place. Doesn't necessarily answer the question of the fact that you've still got to interpret all of that data. Now, what Moby allows you to do is just talk directly to that data. So an example might be, show me my three best performing and three worst performing meta campaigns of the last 365 days. Brilliant. And within 30 seconds, they're in front of you. Now, what that allows us to do, as I mentioned before, and what it's allowing brands to do is, I touched on the consistent iteration you need to have in acquisition and attribution. You need to be agile. You need to be able to adapt and to modify your campaigns based on so many different elements that are happening in the industry and in the world at large. Being able to have access to that data at your fingertips and make those decisions quickly is huge. And that's before we even then look at layering in things like predictive AI. So really, again, if we look at something like MMM, look at the history of your performance across all of your channels, and then extrapolate from that data based on the day, the time of year, whatever, what discernible trend it can identify. That is so powerful. Being able to go, right, okay, looking at all of this information, we know right now that you should optimize your spending in Meta, Google, and TikTok, reduce your spend in Snapchat, for example. And off the back of that, there's the prediction that you will be receiving XYZ in incremental revenue there. That is just huge from a marketing perspective. Actually, it's not there to be, as I mentioned before, the silver bullet of this is what you need to do is there so that it takes so many hours away from the teams and allows you to be as efficient as possible and to action off the back of it. And I think it's the brands at the moment that are embracing AI that are, and I think that just applies to the population as a whole. It's folks who embrace AI at the moment who are going to be the ones that stand out in even a year, 5 years, 10 years. I genuinely think it's a big fulcrum that we're on as a society at the moment. And I think the brands that are building that into part of their stack are the ones that are going to win.
Yeah, I think it's the speed at which these platforms are moving. I just think of, like things that brands are doing that we're doing, we work with and speaking to, then what we're doing as an agency. And we talk in our agency we talk to a lot of other agencies. We do different lunches and different events of agencies. And one of the questions we ask is, what keeps you up at night?
Yeah. Great question.
Why are you, when you're lying in bed at night and maybe you just can't quite get to sleep because you're thinking about, as a business owner, senior leadership, manager, etc., marketer, listening to this podcast, I think that's a great question. And one of the questions that got asked last week, was what keeps you up at night, and one of the answers was very much what are we doing with AI within our business. And I think it's literally, no matter what social channel you tune into, as a business owner, marketer, it's AI this, AI that, AI this, AI that. But obviously just making sure that as the marketer, business owner, that you are investing time into, or the people that you work with are investing time into different AI, so we're looking to build, or we were looking to build a tool internally that will basically present to a prospect their link gap. And we've started speccing out this, and we're looking at a developer who could build this for us. And we've sort of earmarked roughly about 40 grand internally to do this project. Well, a week ago, I found a tool, which is, I think it's called lovable.dev. And basically it built that tool in 4 minutes for me. So I don't need to spend 40 grand anymore.
Is it? And that's the exact point. It's like, I think when you say to AI to a lot of people think ChatGPT.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, do you use AI in the business? Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
And
we
what it is,
we write a blog post.
Yeah, what it is the marketing team will run something through ChatGPT and then alter it so it sounds like the tone of voice of the business.
Yeah.
If that's what you're doing, get back to the drawing board and start looking at other tools. Because like you mentioned there, like I was listening to an interview the other day, I can't remember exactly who it was, but it was someone, Stephen Bartlett, and they were talking about agentic AI. Yeah. And that's something that we've just released in Triple Whale. And obviously from our perspective at Triple Whale, it's very, very focused on e-commerce. But agentic AI is going to be the next thing, using agents that are AI-based in order to be able to complete tasks that would have taken you a long, long time.
Yeah.
And an example this chap gave was, you could go out and build a business and what have you, and build a website and all of this sort of stuff. And then in the future, you'll be able to get an AI agent to do that for you very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And I think to a lot of folks, that can be a little bit scary. It's like, well, okay, well, where does that leave me? And actually, I think the point I'm trying to make is the viewpoint is you need to become familiar with AI, because AI will either be the thing that becomes a bit of a nuisance to you, or it will be something that is absolutely superpowering you.
Yeah.
It's taking you from being able to do something in 12 hours to being able to do something in half an hour and deliver twice, 3 times, 4 times the value.
Yeah.
Its capabilities are going to be phenomenal, and are only increasing day in, day out.
It's crazy, the speed, how things have changed.
My washing machine has AI now. I don't know what that means.
How's that work?
Right. Well, I have no idea. I think it does something like it weighs the...
adjust the water based on the weight, and then
And that's what I was saying earlier on, is I think beware of false prophets, so to speak. I think AI is thrown around a lot.
But I mean, going back to the sort of AI and attribution, it's Moby, isn't it? Just the fact that you're using AI to interpret the historical data from all said platforms, and you're walking on a Monday morning and you're basically, hey, can you tell me how my ads did over the weekend, which channels performed the best, which and we can do some of that with reports, etc., but not at the speed and the sort of granularity that I think that's what the AI can do.
Yeah, 100%. It's like, run me this report, show me the best cities that we saw the most sales from, create me 5 pieces of copy of my best performing campaigns, and send all of this to me at 8:45 a.m. on a Monday.
Yeah.
So you're coming in, cup of coffee, open the laptop, and bang, there's your strategy for the week.
It's like a task-based AI or a report-based, and you can just adjust it on the fly. Yeah, very, 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 very impressive.
Exactly. And I think the other thing to mention here as well is, circling back to what we were talking about at the start, is one of the key, if we boil it down to something very, very simple, one of the key challenges that folks are seeing regarding attribution is gap. Right. So beforehand, you could track everybody and everything they were doing. Now there is a level of areas that are blind spots, and we need to infer the gaps between that. We can only track so much, not necessarily when you're looking server side, but when you're looking platform side. And with all of these privacy laws, it means there's certain things that you may not anymore have access to. So when we start then looking at something like AI is giving us that ability to bridge those gaps. So part 1, you should be doing server-side tracking. Get the best data you can get hold of. Part 2, you should have some form of AI that's bridging that gap. Ideally, again, triple well. But that's bridging that gap and allowing you to holistically understand that business. And then from there, be able to forecast and predict where you need to go next.
Okay. So we've covered quite a lot of ground.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when I just go back to, I feel like, if we were sat here 18 months ago, I probably wouldn't even mention the word AI. And just the speed at which things have moved, just with what we do in our agency, let alone, obviously people that are super embracing it, being able to build a workable app within 5 minutes the other day, which I did, and that's not something I have that skill of, but obviously I'm visualizing, creating a brief and then getting an AI to build it. Where when I think about that crystal ball of attribution and AI, this is quite a difficult question.
Okay, I'm ready. Right,
Are we ready?
Right, we're ready. Let's go. Difficult question time.
But where's it going to go? When we're thinking, we're here now where we're asking it X, Y, Z, and it's coming back to us with lots of iterations and ideas around creative. It's telling us our best performing this, that, and the other, and best times of day and all that. And let's looking at the predicting this because the weather's, we know like now we've had a bit of nice weather the last few days, and if that's bringing the weather in, but where is it going to go? I think it's only probably 18 months ago we started doing anything with AI. So 18 months from now, what sort of things we're going to see? What sort of things are you maybe hearing at Triple Whale head office? Like, we could do this, or is there anything you can share that's maybe coming down the pipeline?
So I think it's the $1 million question. It literally is a $1 million question. If I knew where it was going to be in 18 months, I would be a billionaire. But I think realistically, the focus seems to be at the moment on this idea of agents. It's like jobs to be done. Yeah. Essentially, how can AI pick up the slack in business? If we use an example, I spoke to somebody the other day who spends 8 hours on a Monday building reports.
Yeah.
And then come Friday is working to 8, 9 p.m., still actioning off the back of the reports they had to build and constantly having to redo those reports during the week. That's not him using his skills to the best of their ability. How many times have we started a job and actually realized that 90% of that job is busy work and 10% execution? Imagine if you could be in a position whereby you had the time, the headspace, the ability to execute flawlessly off the back of these things. And don't get me wrong, it's like I said before, it's not here to replace anybody. It's here to superpower you.
Yeah.
Everybody has their professional capabilities, and being in the best position to execute off the back of that, I think, is going to be phenomenal. And I genuinely think in 5 years' time, we'll probably be in a position where we'll be like, do you remember when we used to do this? And actually, I spent 8 hours pulling that into a sheet and then building a pivot table. And it would take me 4 hours to find that one piece of information from a platform from 4 years, all of these sorts of things. I think we genuinely will look a little bit back like that. But then saying that, when my dad got a Nokia 3310 and the fascia came off, I said to him at the time, I was like, honestly, I don't know where they're going to go from here. Where can technology go? So I'm not standing here as some pariah of forecasting tech. So
it is crazy when you think how fast things shift. And but with AI now, it's just going to be like supersonic. Some of the things we're going to be, even a year, if we sit back down and we're talking about, AI and insert anything to do with business marketing. I mean, it's just, you've got to embrace. I think you just have to embrace, and it is quite like an unknown. Oh, I didn't know. Oh, and then in terms of like reskilling or retraining people in different areas in business, I remember when I went to a conference, like I said, it's probably about 18 months ago, came back, right, ChatGPT guys, and my content team are like,
yeah,
where does that leave us then? What are we going to be doing? Well, we're going to be embracing it. You're going to be experts in this. And of course, we're still creating a lot of content, but certain content we can embrace AI and fast forward even 3 months, it's like, we are able to create, we're creating a lot of, obviously we create literally millions of words every month for clients, and certain elements of AI is used, but our output for clients is so much more, and the quality overall is better. But now by embracing that, we're able to do right by the clients and better by the clients, because we may be doing, for argument's sake, triple the amount of certain areas of content than we were doing manually. The quality's still there, whereas the people that our clients are competing against that aren't embracing a level of AI are still doing a quantity or an amount of work that they just can't compete with us.
Yeah.
So,
and that's the point, right? It's like you will see a shift, and you will see the companies that are adopting these things and the ones that aren't, because it will be the A, quality of output, and B, speed of output. And Triple Whale is a prime example of that. As I mentioned before, run me a report, like go into Moby, run me a report of my last 365 days of content and give me 5 pieces of creative 5 pieces of content for this week that I can test. It'll come back to you with 5 pieces of content, creative. And what that will do is, it's not there saying your copywriters need to have a day off. It's there saying, these are, based on that information, the 5 pieces of copy that will resonate the best with your target audience based on this information that would take you 2 weeks to look through all of your ads and all of those results. And then from there, you're not sitting spinning on your chair going, right, okay, so what should I talk about this week? You've got these 5 lovely frameworks to work off the basis of. Yeah. Like I said before, modify it into your tone of voice, switch up as and when appropriate, all of these sorts of things. And that, like you say, it's that output level.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Spending time on, in an agency, we spend a lot more time on the comms with the client, understanding the brands, understand the nuances. We can save time doing X. We can obviously spend that time, understanding the brand, understanding the market more. Yeah, very exciting. We'll probably do a whole episode on AI with you in a year's time.
Oh, I don't know if I'd be the right person for that. I'll get my one of my colleagues in to talk to you about AI.
So going back to attribution then.
Yep.
So I think we'll have a lot of brands that are like, right, okay, so we've got a problem. Yes, we are spending on all these channels, and we know all these numbers don't make sense. They don't add up. What would you say is a good first step for them to action to try and solve this challenge? Or obviously there's varying challenges out there, but in terms of what would be a good first action for the people that are maybe struggling to piece their patchwork together?
First thing I would do is just get server-side tracking.
Yeah.
We released it on our free plan now, so you can literally get server-side tracking for free if you download the Founders Dash from Triple Whale.
Yeah.
It gives you, like I say, that server-side understanding of what your attribution looks like. Don't get me wrong, it's not going to go into War and Peace like Triple Whale proper does, but it's taking you from 1 to 50 overnight, and the installation is so straightforward and simple that it's moving you towards the right path, and just doing a bit of hygiene on your data.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll obviously link up Triple Whale in the show notes. For those that want to find out more about Triple Whale, more about yourself, what's the best way to do that?
So best way to do that is you can either reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. So I'm James Hawkins. I'm sure you'll probably put a link for that as well. Or alternatively on our website, triplewhale.com. All the information can be found there. We're very, very approachable. So always feel free to call up if you want to have a chat.
Yeah, we'll link all that up. Now, I like to finish every episode with a book recommendation. Do you have a book to recommend to our listeners, James?
I do. And actually, this is something I've been mulling over a lot in my head. So from a non-fiction basis, depending on how you interpret it, my favorite book is Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, which sounds rather grandiose, but I think I'm a big reader, and I've always found that whenever my head gets a little bit carried away, I can always revert back to that, and it calms me down, and it gives me a lot of perspective on things, mainly because at the moment you can go and buy 500 books on every single area of whatever in business that you want to look at. But actually something like that, it was written, 2,000 years ago, and it still holds so accurate based on the work we do, the world we live in, and I take a lot of comfort from that. So I would say to folks, yes, there's a lot of books you can read, but if you have some time, pick up Meditations.
Brings you back down to
it quietens the noise.
Yeah,
it quietens the noise.
That's very important, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very, very apt when we're just talking about the million things that are spinning around just to do with AI, let alone running your your e-com store or running your e-commerce marketing department. But just hang on and have a minute to yourself. And
yeah, and chances are, like, genuinely, I've got an old beaten up copy at home that's I bought for about 50p from a Waterstones about 15 years ago, and it's ripped, dogged, covered in highlighter, notes all over it. And like I say, when I'm in those moments, it's not that I pick it up and read it from front to back cover. I would just open a random page and just read 2 or 3 pages, because it's in sort of little different snippets.
Hit.
Exactly. It's like different meditations. And there's a few books like that as well, like the Almanac of Naval, that can just give you those short insights that you need, especially when we're all working such busy lives.
No, great.
So yeah,
great choice. We'll link that up as well.
Yeah,
one click and you can have it in your in your basket and at your house tomorrow. Right. Well, thanks very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, hit the subscribe or follow button wherever you are listening to this podcast, so you're always the first to know when a new episode is released. Have a fantastic day, and I'll see you on the next one.